Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So, we're doing this series on cults. And we have today the pleasure of having on Leslie Garrett. Thanks so much for coming on, Leslie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And our idea is to talk to people who maybe went through these kinds of cult experiences. And Leslie's going to tell us about her experiences and eventual changing of her experiences with the Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's going to be our episode of today. And
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story with us, Leslie. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
So we were talking a little bit off mic, and I was thinking, well, what's the right first question? And it would be, is it right to say the Jehovah Witnesses is a cult? And you just went, yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's no problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely not. Yeah,
And
for
there's maybe
sure.
some doubt about that, but there's certainly a lot of people who are coming out saying, "Oh no, this is a cult." When once people
hmm
leave, right? I think you all would be
hmm
called apostates. That's going to be a special term.
That would be me. That would,
That would be a special term. There's going to be a lot of
that,
jargon, I think, before the end of
yeah,
the
there's a,
story.
yeah, that would be what I would be considered right now. Sure.
Yeah. But without, it's sort of like, where do you start with something like that? And we thought, well, maybe we'll just start just by talking a little bit about your sharing your experiences with this. You're kind of
hmm
explaining you got in with your family like pretty young. So maybe we'll just start there.
Sure. Yeah. The witnesses did their ministry door to door. So they came to our door. I was about six, and my mom started studying with them. And, she studied, I believe for it was like maybe close to a year. And then she decided to become baptized into this organization. And my brother and I were raised basically in it. He was a little older than I was when she decided to make this switch. So it was, I think, more difficult on him because being 11 and 12, and then all of a sudden everything changes in your world. School wise, you're not allowed to do all the holidays. You're not allowed to do the birthdays, and so everything just changed. So we started, she started taking us to the weekly meetings. There was a Sunday meeting.
Just out of curiosity, Leslie, was your mom
hmm
like kind of a searching person? Was there already religion in the family and she converted over, or was it
So that's,
obvious
that's
like
an,
how that? Yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting question. My mom, this is my adult look back at it. My mom was raised in a very controlling family environment. So my grandparents were very controlling, and they were religious, but not overly religious. And my mom belonged to when I was a young child belonged to a community church, and we went to a community church. I do believe my mom was searching for something, whatever that might be, something to belong to. But what was interesting is she found the witnesses comfortable, and I believe that's because it's another controlling environment. You go from something that you're raised as, and it's familiar, right? And so even though you think you're making your own choice and you're getting into this great community, it's very, very controlling. So I think that was my mom's basis with subconsciously not knowing that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hmm
When you
Yeah.
look back at it, like, is there something about like what they were teaching that really spoke to her, or was it more just like the sort of like the psychological familiarity kind of thing that you're talking about, or was there?
I think there was definitely a psychological familiarity for her. That was number one. Number two, the witnesses, they are very biblically based. So, I mean, we studied the Bible back and forth, left and right, all the time. It was their interpretation of certain scriptures, but it was definitely biblically based, and it basically encompassed and surrounded your entire life. So if you're somebody who's trying to, she's also a very black and white person.
Yeah.
It's, you're talking right, wrong, good, evil. There isn't any gray in her life, and I feel that the witnesses encompass that. It's very black and white, very good versus evil, very right versus wrong. There is no room for that gray area. That took me a long time to understand that life is is, mostly gray. You have to, figure that out. But yes, I think that was one of, and she's still like that. She's still very black and white.
I was wondering about that like sense of certainty, right? It almost sounds like,
Hmm.
that's the feeling. It gives you this real certain feeling in a way
Sure. There's
full
also
of
a
doubts, right?
superiority complex that goes with that. We are the chosen people. We are correct. We are the right. Everybody else in the world is considered worldly. Whomever's not a non-believer, and they don't see the light, they don't see the truth, and we do. And so there's very much of that superiority complex that I think goes along with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Leslie, you said your brother was like 11 or 12 when you guys converted.
Right.
Say a little because I don't, I mean, maybe I'm sure some of the audience is familiar with this. Maybe they had somebody in school or somebody they know, but
Hmm.
say a little bit about, if you can, about what the kind of just general beliefs are, and then how does that impact your life, especially growing up? Because I think as adults, we're not having birthday parties or dressing up too much for Halloween at our workplace, but in school, you'd go through all of those, little mini
Sure.
holidays. And I had a friend of mine who was a witness as a child, and his childhood was infinitely different than every other person who he was sitting next
Yeah.
to in class. It's a very different thing. So if you would maybe speak from your experience, plus, what you also just know in general.
Sure, sure. The holidays were all lumped into basically one belief of they were pagan. That's what they believed, that they came from a pagan origin, so they didn't want to follow anything that would be pagan oriented. Uh, Also, we were not allowed to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance or vote or serve in the military or pledge your allegiance to anything but God. So that was also not allowed. So the holidays and the birthday parties were all kind of lumped into one thing. They added things that were not allowed during that time. You weren't allowed to. I couldn't go to school dances. That was definitely a no because you would be associating with worldly people.
What about dancing
Um,
in general?
you could dance. They had like at weddings. Weddings were a big deal to the witnesses because it was your literally your only celebration your entire life you could do. That
Wow.
was about all you had. So they were a big deal.
Get your
Dancing
boogie
was
on
fun.
then. That's your only
Yeah.
chance.
Oh, yeah. That was it. That was it. You got a wedding to go to. You're like, all right, here we go. We get a chance. Yeah, dances were not allowed. So growing up in that, you were, in school. There were congregations where there were a lot of kids in the same school. I was not. I was the only child in my school, so I was very ostracized. Because of that. Holiday parties, my mom would pick me up from them early. I wasn't allowed to stay for those. Um, so those were all the restrictions, I guess, during childhood that was not allowed to do. You weren't allowed to watch rated R movies.
I'm still not.
Obviously,
You say you can say it to
obvious,
X, Daniel, but I'm not going to say that now.
right there.
Our,
um, yeah. So
live and bottom. Yeah.
we weren't allowed to do anything like that, and socializing. Obviously, we had to get through our school day or our work day, but outside association with anyone who wasn't a witness was discouraged. We're going to say that it
Hmm.
was
I always
discouraged.
wondered about that, Daniel. I know how it was for you, but I had one girl who was a Jehovah Witness when I was growing up in school too. And you just sort of knew like whenever anything happened, she would have to leave. So, and I never knew if
Hmm.
she felt bad or good about it. I didn't feel like as kids that we thought that much about it. I don't know if she felt ostracized or not, but it does make you wonder. I mean, I guess you said Daniel grew up with kids too.
Yeah,
Uh,
my guess is yeah, for sure. I mean, I
but
did.
and now
I
you look
felt
back
very
and like that must have
ostracized.
felt awkward for that person.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
like
terrible.
obviously, but yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I just
Yeah,
remember
and
like no, you're in school, public school. Sometimes they'll do Valentine's Day things. They couldn't do any of that. There's no,
yeah.
definitely not Halloween. So other kids might be having depending on how wealthy your school is. Some kids can put costumes on. Some kids just wear some, weird makeup, whatever. And now that, you know what, but those kids, the Jehovah's kids couldn't do any of that stuff, you know,
Yeah, no.
like
We're,
none of this kind of a thing.
it's kind of like a FOMO thing, like a perpetual FOMO, but like,
Yeah,
did
for
you
sure. It
did you
it
get
caused
crap from other kids? Did they give you a
Oh
hard time?
yeah. Oh, for
Okay,
sure. Oh yeah.
okay.
I was, relentlessly teased. And I actually have one memory. I was on the bus and I was getting teased, and it turned out that the bus driver was happened to be studying with them. And the only reason I know this is she actually pulled the bus over. She heard what was going on, pulled the bus over, turned around and said, "Don't you know that Jehovah's God's name and you need to leave her alone?" And it was this whole thing. And I thought, "Oh, don't do this. You're just going to make this worse on me." But it was, she was trying to stand up for me. And, but during that time, I was kind of mortified about the whole thing. But yeah, it was for sure. I got teased quite a bit. Yeah, for it. It was a big deal.
Leslie, how old were you when you realized that like this was not within the confines of what we would consider normal? And then the second part is fuck normal. So as an adult, right? But more
Right.
importantly, when did you realize that this was a detriment to your life?
Whew. Um, okay. Well, I knew right away that it wasn't normal. I knew right away that
Okay.
we were on the outs. So that was like, I knew off the bat. Even as a child, I knew this isn't normal, but it became my normal. It just
Mm,
wasn't, societal normal.
mm,
As for your other question, it that was a slower process. I would say I was definitely, when I hit teenage years, I had my little rebellious periods. I was trying to kind of get away with things my maybe my mom wouldn't find out, like hang out with a worldly boy, or
ooh,
hang out with, I know, woo, hang out with, a couple worldly friends. And but it was this constant battle within myself. I think I always knew that. It was a constant battle within myself of, well, I have to do the right thing. But then I was like, but I just want to be free. And so, your teenage years are really tough anyway,
yeah,
and let
yeah,
alone to add that to it. And it was this constant pull again with myself. I was like, well, I want to do this. And it wasn't like I wanted to go be a bad person or do bad
right,
things. I
right.
just wanted freedom. And then I thought, well, I can't do that. So I have to be good and serve Jehovah and have, and stay within those confines of that organization. But so that was a longer period. And when I hit um, into my 30s, I would say early 30s, I really started to go, okay, there's problems here. Like I was mature enough and adult enough to understand that, all right, I'm not liking certain things I'm seeing. And it was like slowly starting to open my eyes, because you got to understand, critical thinking is not encouraged at all.
Mm,
You are not raised to be a critical thinker. So that took me a while to be able to go, it's okay to start thinking these ways. And I started to see I think the first thing I saw that was really a big deal actually was the political system within the organization. That was a big deal, like how your family was set up. So because my mom was married to a non-believer, and she had her kids, we were actually kind of lower on the pole. If you had a family that had a husband and wife with their children, and the husband was considered an elder, and the wife was a full-time pioneer, which is somebody who spent their time in the service field going door to door preaching, they were higher up. And so I think I saw an actual political system within that. And
mm,
that started to really bother me, because, we're all just humans, right? And then who's
Yeah.
gonna, and especially there, you think everybody should be just accepted, and it's supposed to be like that. And it wasn't at all. It
mm.
was, we were lower on the scale for sure.
Can women, like you kind of use that terminology, and we were kind of joking at the beginning, like when you get into these areas, there's always this kind of weird language, right?
Hmm.
That kind of pops up. So,
Sure.
there's the elders, and like you kind of just said, your mom was a pioneer. I wasn't sure when I was trying to learn more about this before, prepping for the episode. Can women even become elders? Because I got the impression maybe
No,
no. So women
no.
like are pioneers, and the guys are the
Women
elders.
have their place. Yes,
Okay.
women have their place. There's definitely men are the only ones who can become an elder. Women do not hold a position of any sort of, of any place in that organization. In fact, say that you are meeting to go out in service and there is no brother there, so there is no male there, then a woman must wear, they had women wear a head covering. You had to wear a head covering to be able to say a prayer, before you went out. So women were definitely, um, we were to suppress any personal opinions, emotions, natural instincts. We were definitely taught to be submissive and humble, which fed into how marriages were as well. It's particularly mine, because I did marry into it.
Maybe like before we do the marriage one, because that was, we talked a little
Hmm.
bit off mic beforehand. The other thing you
Yeah.
brought up from your teenage years was you sort of saw your brother kind of shunned, which is like one of the major notorious kind of things, right?
Yeah, for
Shunning
sure. So
aspect.
my brother left. He decided he was like I said 11, 12 when he became in, and when he was about 20, he was done. He wasn't going to do this. And you have two choices. There is no gray. There is black and white. You are either gone or you're in it. And he left, and he actually joined the military because he didn't have any schooling either. That's a whole other subject. Schooling was not encouraged at that time, to go into college. But he went into the military. He left, and I watched my mother. She did not speak to him for years. Didn't have anything to do with him. I saw him very little. So being that age, I was 15. Being that age, watching that happen to my brother, um, as we talked about a little bit off camera, is I realized love was conditional. And I was super scared to lose that love of a parent during that time. And so that is why we went two different routes. He left, I stayed. I conformed, he left, but they were equally just as damaging and difficult in their own way. And he and I have talked about that later on. But yeah, he was definitely shunned. And if you leave the organization, you are not, all these people that were your social circle, your community for years and years, they will not speak to you. You have nothing. So that is where the cult, I definitely would define that in the cult category for being the witnesses, because um they create your entire world around this organization. I can barely even call it a religion, but whatever you want to call it. But
Organization is fine. Yeah.
yeah, organization. Your entire world is that. So your social world, everything is that. Your family, everything is tied up in that. And they practice shunning basically as a control to, get you back, because a lot of people go out into it and they have nothing, and they're floundering, and
Right.
they don't know how to build a life, because you have to build a new life if you do that. And to start over is very difficult with zero help. You have no emotional support, no support from a friend, no support from anybody. So he left, and I watched that happen. And it's a tool. The shunning is a tool. They call it to keep the organization clean and moral, but it's definitely a tool
Yeah, we did
to
Well,
these
to keep you.
episodes recently on like attachment theory. Daniel and I spent a lot of
Hmm.
time talking about that, and you're really playing
Yeah.
with people's attachments there, right? Because it's like
Oh, I
basically
had
saying,
major problems with that. I
yeah, this
had
is
fear
going
of
to mess it up.
abandonment, anxious attachment for years and years and years. The fear of abandonment was, whew, that was years of trying to work through that, and that was well after I left. Yeah, the fear of abandonment, the anxious attachment, was a huge, huge one for me.
so
Because that's what I would see.
so we have our kind of running definition here of cults on the meta scale, right? So
Yeah,
conformity, which
yeah,
fits, social
yeah,
cohesion, and a charismatic leader, which I do want to, before we move on, I want to give the background on this a little bit. But from the conformity portion, actually, I want to add this because I just, when you were talking earlier, I was like, it inherently, um, you have to give up critical thinking. And we've talked about this in a previous episode, but that specifically
Hmm.
goes with that. Like, if you're going,
Hmm.
in order to conform to this thing, whether it's Jehovah's Witness, right, with you, I had on one of our other co-contributors, Roar, we had his friend on, Nathan Orchard, who was a Mormon. We're going to have on a friend of my brother's here pretty soon. She was a Mennonite. Very similar kind of, story. And, even now with the current political climate, we could definitely say it's a cult, without a doubt. And critical thinking is absolutely has to be abandoned because part of it is your ability to withhold even your own judgments, right? Is
Hmm.
to take the other person's opinion and say, hold on, maybe I'm wrong. Let's just see. Maybe these Jehovah's peoples are right. Let's go down that road and then I'm going to put myself in their shoes. But for when you're inside doing it on the outside, that is no good. Cannot.
No, you cannot. In fact, if you do have any sort of issue or anything heavy going on in your family, you are encouraged to only speak to the elders and not to seek outside sources because you might be influenced by worldly thinking. So here you are going through whatever issue you're going through, and you're going to these untrained men, these men who are not trained to be therapists, who are not trained to be psychiatrists, who don't have any sort of formal training, and you're supposed to entrust your care in your life and
Mm-hmm.
through them. And and also the other factor of that is you didn't want to go to them as well because you never knew if you were going to be judged by them and then kicked out. So if you did have a problem that they found morally wrong, they could disfellowship you and you were gone. And so then why would you? I learned particularly to not open up to almost anyone about issues, and I was dealing with a lot of things within myself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I heard about that was really fascinating. Again, I was prepping a little bit for this, and one of the ladies was talking about there was sort of almost like a little bit of a spying network kind of vibe too, where if you said something to a friend, you weren't sure if
Yeah.
they would tell it to an elder. So I better not tell. Is that like that kind of
Yeah,
feeling that you had too?
for
Like I have to
sure.
be careful what they say in front of who.
Yeah, they would definitely. So they encouraged to love your brother. And if you find that they're on a wayward path and you hear that they're on a wayward path, then you will then be guilty if you know of such information and you need to step forth and tell the elders. So you found I found a couple groups where you had like the quote, oh gosh,
Snitches get stitches. That's the.
the bad group in the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? You have that bad group that you could go and we would party and do a couple things. We had our
So these
limits,
are like
but
Jehovah Witnesses, bad girls and bad
yeah,
boys.
yeah, you had your little group, you found it, and then but you knew who were the ones that would tell on you, so you knew not to trust them. But it was really hard to even really trust anybody because you never knew if they were going to get a guilty conscience and then go and say something. And literally, we're not talking about anything crazy. We're talking about maybe some underage drinking and stuff like that. Like nothing.
Yeah,
There's
like
nothing crazy.
9-year-olds drinking Smirnoff. You know what I mean? It's fine.
Right. I mean, it was, but yes, that is true. There is that little spy thing going on where people would tell on you. In fact, one quick story. My girlfriend and I think I think I was like 16 and she was maybe 15. And we went up to Kenosha to a skate demo where like they had the skateboarders at the time, right? So you're talking 89. And we were just at this skate demo and it was outside. We weren't doing anything. We were just there. Well, somebody passed and saw us outside. And not only did we not get spoken to directly about it, they mentioned it from the stage. They mentioned it from the stage that two of their young people were seen hanging out with worldly people at this thing. And so there's an elder talking about it on the stage, and we're looking, we're like, oh my God, they're talking about us. And they hadn't even come to us and talked to us. So it was very publicly humiliating. If they found, they didn't even give us a chance to talk to us about it. They just went and talked about it on stage. And was like, oh my gosh, yeah, yeah, it was. But yeah,
You know,
you get,
it's so funny because you want to like, even when you're telling a story, you sort of want to laugh,
yeah, right.
you know,
It
because
was
it seems so
crazy.
absurd.
It's
But like it's
absurd.
mortifying, like when you're
Yeah,
in that, right? It's not
yeah,
funny at
yeah. You're
all, but it's
16 years old and
hard.
you're not doing anything technically wrong. You're just kind of doing something that you thought might be kind of fun to go do at that time, and here, you're getting scolded from it publicly in front of the congregation on the stage. So that was nuts. But yeah, that did happen. They do.
That fits the second point, right? Which is the social cohesion aspect.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
have to conform, and to the point about your mother, right, of being black or white, in or out. I mean, almost a foundational piece to any cult is that you are either in the cult or out of the cult. There is no
Hmm.
halfway because, like you said, they were trying to keep it clean, but like no matter how many times you wipe an asshole, it's still full of shit. You know what I'm saying? So like that's kind of how it is. But in order for that kind of there's no boundary if it's semi-permeable. It has to
Right,
be a one-way door. And it,
right.
it makes it easier to think because then you say, oh, you're either with us, against us, right? You're
Hmm.
either
Hmm.
witness or whatever a non-witness is, asshole,
Right,
whatever they're called. You
right.
know what I mean? Or yeah, and the same thing politically, you're either aligned with us or you're one of them, whoever them is, it doesn't matter. But in
Hmm.
order to do that, you have to be very like simple-minded. And it builds off the first point of like you have to give up critical thinking. That in order to do,
Hmm.
once you give that up, then now you're just left with two choices: us or them, good or bad, me or you. It's very
Hmm.
binary in decision, and it makes it easy to exclude others. It makes it very easy for you to go, they
Hmm.
are not us, therefore
Right.
they are bad, worldly, stupid,
Hmm.
whatever label you want to
Hmm.
use. You know what I mean?
And there again, you're talking that superiority complex that comes
Mhm.
out. They think they feel they're superior to others, and you know, and they're in the antithesis of it's the antithesis of what you should be. I mean, if you're going to be this loving organization and we welcome everybody in, and we want to help save everybody, but it wasn't. It was like you have to do this, and we are the truth. We are the light.
Leslie, before we move on, and Eric, you guys brought this up earlier, so I'd like for you to touch on it before we kind of move to kind of like how Leslie's breaking out of this, thing for her or whatever else she wants to talk about.
I got a
But
little follow up on the like her brother situation too, but I'll catch it in a
yeah,
second.
so just like so the last part, and we haven't gotten to this in our own episodes, which is probably what we do next, but the last portion that we've kind of been using as our working definition for cults is this charismatic leader. And
Hmm.
I don't think, I mean, I certainly didn't know about the witnesses piece of this, the kind of this charismatic leader individual that Eric mentioned earlier. So, if you guys would enlighten me and our listening and watching audience onto this part of the Jehovah's Witness, that'd be good.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I remember that hearing the dude's name, but like, what was it, Leslie? Again,
Yeah,
who's
so
the founder?
originally the founder was a gentleman named Charles Taze Russell, and it
Yeah,
was in the late 1800s. And so there was originally, and he called them the Bible students. They weren't called Jehovah's Witnesses at that point, but he was the original founder of it. And then after he passed, it went to, oh, I want to say his name was Rutherford. It was another man who took over, and his name was Joseph Rutherford, and he took over. And then it went to a gentleman named Nathan Knorr, I believe. So
it's almost
Nathan
like a
Knorr,
lineage of like
it
patriarchs or
was of,
something
yeah,
was happening.
patriarchs.
Yeah,
But after Knorr is when it got interesting because there wasn't that single leader anymore. After Knorr, it became what they call the governing body. So it was a small group of men that said they receive the information through the Holy Spirit, through Jesus. They said they receive it from God through Jesus Christ, through his Holy Spirit. And so they became, so it is no longer a person, it's a group. I want to say it's small. It's like maybe 8 to 10, men in this group. And so they are the governing body, and what they say is what you need to follow and listen to. Also, if they are wrong, which they have been about certain things,
Wrong. They're never
um,
wrong.
when they're wrong or there needs to be a course correction, you just have to accept it, and they just go, well, that's that's not what Jehovah wanted. We're going to go this way. And so it's the governing body. So it isn't technically a charismatic leader anymore, but then it goes down into, they break everything down into, I talked about the elders, but then there's the circuit overseer who is higher than the elders. And then there's the district overseer who's higher than him. And so when these men would come in to say the circuit overseer was in town and he was going to come into your congregation, oh, everybody showed up that day, to the Kingdom Hall. Everybody was on their best behavior. Everybody's going out in service and greeting everybody. And it was all just, I think that bothered me. And that was another factor that really bothered me. And I was like, okay, so, you're going to put on your smiley, perfect face for this man who comes in, and it's not supposed to be like that. But yeah, so
hanging
it's
out
the
in the
governing.
skate park that weekend, Leslie.
Don't
No
skate out.
hanging out in the
No.
skate park when the Search District guy
Yep,
is
can't do
around.
that.
No, can't
Yep,
get caught at the
can't
skate
do
park.
that. I gotta wear my below the knee dress and go out, and
Now,
that
all
was a
those
big thing
men,
too, dress code.
all those men were uncircumcised, or is that not a requirement?
No, that was never a topic on that.
Okay,
There was
all right.
nothing that
Well,
was ever, no, that was never, you could be one way or the other on that. That was
It's,
one thing that was not controlled.
it's
Hmm.
actually in the anthropological conversations, we have sort of a friend of the show we reference, one Ryan Davenport, our anthropologist, and he kind of says, well, a
Uh-huh.
lot of this religion stuff starts with like the charismatic leader, and then
Yeah,
eventually it becomes like a hierarchy organization.
right.
And at that point, you're like, well, okay, well, guess we'll call that a religion. Shrug,
Yeah.
but it starts in something that's usually some charismatic person. Daniel and I have been trying to like play around with like how does this grow and develop, right? And it seems to be
Hmm.
like the anthropological story of that too. Ryan
Right.
will
I
say
think when
something
it
like
gets
all
large
religion
enough.
starts as cults or something, right? And then they kind of grow.
Right. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it starts with one person, right, who's starting
Yeah.
this whole thing, and then it grows into, I think as it grows and picks up momentum and speed and gets bigger and bigger, you lose that one person and you get into this. At least that's how it is with witnesses in my experience.
Maybe before we go and do, because I am curious, like we'll go through like the beliefs and all that kind of stuff and
Hmm.
hear how you, I'm curious like what it felt like to, the marriage aspect that you brought up earlier too. But
Yeah.
I just with your brother, it's one of the things that hit me when we were talking a little bit off mic. So I guess I had two thoughts. Did your brother try to encourage you to leave too, or did you keep a relation with him? And the other part that's kind of funny when you were telling it was like, okay, it was okay that your dad wasn't a member, but you had to like shun your brother, I guess, because
Hmm.
his leaving was worse than your dad never participating in the first place.
Well, there's a difference. So my dad never became baptized into the organization, and my brother did. And there was a lot of pressure to get baptized when you hit about early teens, or there's a lot of pressure from different members of the congregation to get baptized. When are you going to get baptized? It's this whole thing. And so when you get baptized, you make this commitment. And so because my brother had done that, he had made a commitment. My dad never did that. So my dad, it was still okay. He was a non-believer, but it was fine. But my brother, because he made that commitment and left, then that's when the shunning
That's
came in.
apostate. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my brother never, no, he never encouraged me. Actually, I was still a teenager when that happened, and he was just trying to figure it out and find his own way. And I think he was so lost in his own way, he didn't have any support. I mean, nothing, So he was, building everything from scratch and trying to figure it out as a 20-year-old. And so no, we didn't have much of a relationship. Here and there we would talk, or he'd come home and I'd see him for a day maybe or something like that. But not until really started after I left. After I left when I was 35, then we started to try to uh, repair that, and now we have a great relationship with each other, and it's, we have our shared trauma bonding, so it's our thing. But we have a great relationship now, and we've talked all about it, and he knows I went through just as a hard time as he went through, just like I said, different ways, different aspects. Yeah.
Well, maybe like the other part, Dana, if it's cool with you, is like,
Yeah.
so at what age did you sort of get married? And that's a kind of a deep commitment, not only to a person, but now you're committing to
Right.
Hmm.
life, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So most witnesses, so there is no sex allowed prior to marriage. All right. So that is a disfellowshipping act, to do that. So most witnesses get married very, very young.
At
So
like
you're talking 18,
14.
18, like 18, okay, like 18, 19, 20. They get married very young into these marriages when you're just a kid. You don't even know yourself, and you're making this commitment, and it's because they didn't want to commit a sin and then put their life in jeopardy of
Yeah.
that's a whole other subject of Armageddon, but putting your life in jeopardy. So they um so they got married very young. And you also have to think too, you want to talk about your dating pool being small. Okay, so you have like six guys from which to choose from, like which one am I going to pick? You have like this small circle. And I was actually 23 when I got married. So I was a little, I was like an old lady, right? So I was older. And I got married, and I thought at the time I was doing the right thing, and I was pleasing, it's that people pleasing idea. And I was pleasing God and pleasing my family and pleasing, and it wasn't like I didn't love him. I loved him, and he gave me two wonderful children, but it was not a great marriage. It was not in any sort of aspects. There was a lot of issues with that.
In
But
many
yes, I was.
I'm sorry.
in
No, go
many
ahead.
Orthodox religion, any orthodoxy aspect of religion, they encourage marriage at a very young age. So that's not just
Hmm.
Jehovah's Witness, but that's in,
Right.
that's for multitude of reasons. One is because
Hmm.
the people are young and horny, and that can cause them
Yeah.
to, engage
Yeah.
in the nasty, if you will, want to call
Right.
it that.
Right.
But also when you're that young and horny, you're also very fertile. So
Right.
somebody could be, by the time they're 23 or 24, strapped
Hmm.
down with two or three kids. Well,
Correct.
you're perfect now. Now you're in this for the rest of your life now.
Hmm.
And that's all religions.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of some specific friends that I have in religions that's the case. You go out with
Hmm.
somebody two or three times, you're like, okay, that's good. They look good. We're going to do this thing. And then, they have a few kids, and all of a sudden now, for the rest of your life, you're probably
Yeah.
in this thing because you have to support your family. You're
Yeah.
tired from doing that. Whatever energy you have left is probably going to be to bang your old man or your old lady.
Yeah.
And you pay your tithes to the culture, to the tradition or whatever, and you're a useful tool for them. You're a,
Hmm.
you're a hamster in a wheel. So it's in your, where you grew up, but it's in many other traditions as well. It has been
Hmm.
for
Even in like,
probably a long time. It's almost a mechanism of control, really.
like thinking about
Well,
this whole
sure.
thing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Leslie. Yeah.
No, no, go ahead, please. I'm
No,
fine.
I was just like thinking, well, I was just thinking about, we've talked about in different episodes because there's sort of this underlying question that we're asking of like, how many cult beliefs can still like hang around, in a bigger culture or something? It's kind of a thing you wonder about. But even in talking with my mom, who's like born in 1940, or I grew up
Hmm.
with my grandma, like the whole idea that you have premarital sex, I've asked my mom about, and she was like, no,
Hmm.
no,
Yeah.
no,
No
no.
way.
So it was like,
No way.
at a certain point, the culture changed, but like you were living a life that like you go back a little bit in the time machine and it would have been pretty
Oh,
typical
for sure.
a lot of
Yeah,
different,
yeah.
right?
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. You just were, it was not allowed. In fact, if you wanted to date, you were encouraged obviously to date. You had to have a chaperone. You had
Yeah,
to
I
have
heard
somebody
about
with
that
you.
too. Like it was
Yeah.
very limited contact you would be able to have with this
Hmm.
person.
Yeah. Yeah. You had limited contact. You could spend a lot of phone time with each other, but if your families were around, but to spend one-on-one time alone, you could not, because they were so afraid commit a sin, and and then then you got all sorts of heaps of problems. So yeah, so you get married very, very young, and I was a little bit older, but yeah, I mean, if you want to
Did you
call
feel like it
23
was
old.
hard to even understand? Was your husband older too? Was he an older guy, or was he was about
No, he
20
was
years
younger.
young?
He was actually 21.
Oh, look at you, Mrs. Robinson.
I know. Look at me. Look at me. Yeah, he was actually, I mean, we were just so young, and then we had our first child 3 years later or 2.5 years later. And then, we had our son, after that. So, yeah, you're just kind of, your life rolls into this whole thing, and you're not
Hmm.
even really paying attention to what you actually want. You never stop to ask, hey, what do I actually want here? What's good for me? How do I want to build my life? Because your life is already pre-built in a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you have people who are intentionally guiding horny people and they're
Yeah.
deciding for them, right? They're like,
Hmm.
here, do this thing, and then now lock yourself in this system. So,
Yeah.
and anyways,
Was there like a kind of just a like psychological aspect? I got like a psych degree in the background. Daniel and I are both
Hmm.
collision, but was one of these things where like you're with this person and you have this strange feeling like I never really got to know them that well before we started
Hmm.
on this thing, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I have to figure out like who this person actually is that you're involved with.
Oh yeah, actually I was that was probably one of the biggest things is after we got married, I was like, what? He put on his best face during our whole dating and engagement and everything. And then after we got married, it was a big eye opener actually. And I was just supposed to listen and submit, and I had my place. And yeah, it was quite miserable for a long time. And I started, I think we talked about, when I was in my mid 30s. I was married a total of 11 years. And I would say we were about married maybe 9 years, and I started to really question, the witnesses and their teachings. And when he heard me like double thinking about that, it caused us even more problems than we already had, because he was like, how could you even do that? What do you mean you're questioning this? And, I knew then that if I wanted to change my life and I needed to do that, I was going to have to light the whole thing up and burn it and walk away. And I knew what all that meant. But that's scary. It's scary. It's your whole life you've built, and when you come out of it, you don't have anything. You're not going to have a friend. You're not going to have a support. You're doing this whole thing on your own. But I knew that it was going to be that way if I wanted to change my life in any sort of way or fashion. I was also getting physically ill when I was going to the Kingdom Hall. Believe it or not, my body was showing. Because I was, yeah, like I would get migraines, upset stomachs every time I went in. Like I was like, God, well, every time I'm here, I get a migraine, and every time I'm here, I feel nauseous and sick because I couldn't stomach what was being fed down my throat anymore. And, so I was physically getting ill from that. And it was just, I knew it was time when I knew it was time, but I knew what it was going to cost me, and I knew what I had to do to get out of it.
so
Like
what
a
was
real
the
oh, I
what
was
what
gonna
was
say
the
the Chinese medical aspect of that, Dan. You want to talk about that just for a
yeah,
second?
go for it.
Because it's kind of
Hmm.
fascinating because there's a whole, I mean,
Right,
psychologically, you call that like a somatoform disorder
Yeah.
or something, right? The
right.
emotions are repressed and they come out in these physical symptoms. I mean,
Yeah.
but like in the Chinese medical world, those are all kind of classic symptoms that they tie into what they would call the wood phase, and it has to do with the liver, and it's supposed
Hmm.
to be how the body regulates its energy and its flow. And so to get headaches and stomach aches are classic. And then
Hmm.
there's a kind of like in Chinese medicine, there's this theory of which emotions are connected, and this is sort of like anger and frustration
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
like unfulfilled desires sometimes is brought up,
Yeah, very
and how those
suppressed.
things gets
Yeah.
repressed, and then that
Hmm.
all explodes out into these things. Yeah, I mean, like you obviously lived that, and probably like freedom on some level maybe tied into spiritually those things too. Like did you, that desire, like I want to be free at some point or another, and that
Freedom is still
frustration builds.
the number one thing that is important to me. If you ask me one thing that's important to me, I'm going to tell you it's my freedom. It's freedom. It's freedom to choose however I want to choose. And I had to give myself permission though, to figure out how to do that, because for a long time I didn't even give myself permission. After I left them, I was governing myself, and telling myself I wasn't allowed to do that. It was so long to work through all that. It was so long. And I was suppressing my own self even after I got out, because I was like, oh, I can't do that. Like, and I still had that major people pleasing thing. And I couldn't set boundaries to save my life. I didn't know how to set a boundary. So that was all a relearning, of building, having to build a new life. I had to learn how to do all those things that I didn't know how to do. I had to give myself permission to have a choice. Like, oh, I have a choice. Wow, I have a choice. I didn't know what to do with that for a long
That's
time.
one of the things we've been trying to talk about, I think, Daniel, too. This idea, like, if you're going to like progress, let's say psycho-spiritually, which is like one of our themes in the whole
Mm-hmm.
podcast, is you have to be a free person to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have freedom, you can't in any individual way say that you can actually progress as a person or grow, whether you want to say psychologically or psycho-spiritually. You need freedom to be able to do that. It's sort of like
Oh,
fundamental
100%.
ingredient, right? So that's kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's been a big subject matter. Yeah.
So
Yeah, for
Leslie,
sure.
you're okay. So you left. How old were you when you left?
I was 30, 35 when
35.
I
So you're
left.
35 when
Mm-hmm.
you left, and you had
Mm-hmm.
said that a couple years before that you were starting to question.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so the questioning is the sort of the outpouring of inner workings of your thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what were some of the initial thoughts or feelings or realizations, inspirations, influences, whatever word you want to use, that were sort of streaming through you that led you to go, hold on, I don't know about this. Like, what were some of those influences?
Well, okay. I had, my ex-husband had some siblings. So I had a sister-in-law who was very young, and she got very ill, and she had cancer. And Jehovah's Witnesses do not allow blood transfusions. So she, oh, man, it was like diagnosis to death with her was 2 weeks. It was really quick. She had stage 4, didn't know it, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and her red blood cell count, dropped to nothing, and so she seized and passed. And I think I mean, obviously she would have passed eventually anyway. I think what upset me is that she was not allowed. Your medical decisions on your own life were governed. You were not allowed to take that blood transfusion. They based it off of scripture in Acts about how God says you are to stay away from, all blood and anything with blood. And so that's what they based this on. So I think that's what really kind of ignited it. I was angry. I was angry that, and everybody was like, oh, she died faithful, she died faithful. And I was like, what? What do you mean?
Who gives a
Like,
fuck?
who gives a fuck if she died faithful? She didn't have a choice. I mean, she had a choice. She could have taken it, but what would have happened to her? That's what I mean. It's like all these. So she didn't. Her choice wasn't even allowed, and I think that's what initially started it. I was like, wait a minute. Why do they get to tell me what I get to do with my body as well, and what happens to me if I'm in a health situation? And so that was the beginning. And I think there was just, which I find in any religion, but there was so much hypocrisy. There was so much hypocrisy in the organization, and there was just, I just wasn't able to. I was starting to really see it and stomach it, or couldn't stomach it anymore. Hence the upset stomachs. But um, that was the big one, was when she died. When she passed away, I was like, okay, like that's when I started to really question what was going on. And then I started to pay attention, just to pay attention as to what I was being fed and what was being said. And I was like, wait a minute, I just felt suffocated. Everything just felt suffocated. I didn't have My children were the other thing. That was also the big one. My children were 8 and 4 when I left. But prior to that, I remember thinking, is this really what I want to teach them? Is this really what I want? Do I want them going through what I went through and not having that choice? Do I really believe what I'm feeding them is what I want, is what I want to give them that experience? And that was probably my um,
Yeah.
biggest reason was my children, and I saw them and I was like, I cannot let my daughter see that this is okay to have a marriage this way, and this is how a marriage is to be modeled, and a partnership, because there was no partnership. And those were the big things, impetus for me to get out and leave. I'm like, I can't do to my kids what was done to me and controlled and shoved down my throat. And I just couldn't do it. I wanted them to be able to have the life that I wanted, that I had desired. And so, I mean, to this day, I think they're both very happy that, I left, and they've both thanked me. They have both thanked me because they both have said, wow, our lives would be completely different. I said, yeah, it would be completely different. And if that's the one gift I can give to them, that I was able to give them the freedom to choose, and if all that, leave me out of it. But if I could give that give that gift to them, that was the most rewarding thing.
Thanks, Leslie. That's like really powerful, actually.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. That's like, I mean, like I have two kids too, and yeah,
Hmm.
I could just imagine that feeling like of going, okay, I better look really deeply of like, this is what I
Yeah.
want to pass on. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really
My
funny.
kids were
Yeah,
terrified. They were terrified, not to interrupt you, but they
yeah,
were terrified of my ex-husband. He had a horrible temper, and they were terrified of him. They were, and I, I just couldn't do it anymore. I just was like, my daughter does not need to see this. She's seen enough of it. She needs to see a healthier relationship, which of course took me forever to get. But that was my own journey on figuring all that out. But yeah, I just wanted to give them something more, and that was definitely my
Have
reason.
you have you been a counsel to any others who were thinking about leaving or have recently left?
No, none of them would talk to me, and so I wasn't. Nobody ever came out to me and said, hey, I'm thinking of leaving. I do remember, though, after I left, I ran into an ex-witness, somebody that, and I had gone along with it. I wasn't supposed to talk to her, so I shunned her. I shunned this person because she left, and I ran into her, and I had left at a gym. I was working out and ran into, and I went up to her and I apologized, and I told her I was so sorry that I treated her that way. And she goes, "Oh, Leslie, you were just doing what, they all did." And I said, "I know, but and I feel deeply terrible for doing that to you when you just the same thing. She just wanted to be free of what happened." So, um, I am in touch with a couple ex-witnesses, that I grew up with that are no longer witnesses. We're in touch, and I think whenever I'm going through anything, because as Daniel knows, like, this is a layering process, and you think you deal with everything and you wrap it up, but once it unlayers, another layer pops up, and you're like, oh shit, I thought I dealt with that, and now I'm not. um I will reach out to them and be like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, because they're the ones who totally get it. Like, you guys
Mm,
can all, people can conceptualize what
sure.
it was, or, obviously, because you didn't have the same experience. But when you have that experience, sometimes those are your people who you need to rely
Mm,
on and go to. So
hmm.
I do have them. I do, here and there. I have a couple people that I'll talk to, like, hey, I'm going through this thing, and it's freaking me out. I'm still going through stuff, and yeah. So no, but I never like was a counsel to anyone. Nobody reached out to me, and I wasn't gonna try to pull anyone away. Obviously, it's
Right.
their own choice.
it's kind of wild. It sounds like what was happening was that you not only had to like end your relationship with this group, but you also had to like dissolve a marriage and a family that
Hmm.
was all happening like
all at
in
once.
one pow. Yeah.
Hmm. Yep, all at once, light it on fire. Like I said, you gotta light it on fire because you just know that you have to start from scratch. But at that point, I just didn't care anymore. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just went, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to figure this out. And the kicker is my mom, when I told her I was leaving and I was divorcing, my ex-husband, she was like, okay, I'll still support you. She still supported me, and I was like, what? What do you do? What? I went through all this, and you're still going to support me. So she still spoke to me and talked to me. And then the kicker was about 2 years after I left, she decided to leave, and oh man, was I mad. Oh yeah, that took like years to try to like not be angry about that. I was even more mad because we went through 30 years of all that, and then she decides, oh yeah, I guess you're right, Les, I'm gonna leave. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah,
I
but
was like, oh.
what if you were her inspiration?
I could have been, but at the time I didn't view that, but I'm
Mm.
sure that's how she viewed it, as wow, like I guess Leslie, I was pointing out things that I saw, like we had conversations, so I
Mhm.
I could view it like that, but I was at the time, you're just angry. I was
Right,
just
yeah.
angry about it, and that took some therapy to get through,
And
and but you find,
your brother had been out for how long at that point when you were out?
15 years.
And were you in
15.
contact with him that whole time?
Mm-mm, not really. Very little.
Mm.
Very, very little. We had very little contact. But once I was out, even after that, I think it just took us time.
Right.
There was a lot of forgiveness that needed to happen, and a lot of layers that needed to be worked through of feelings, and to sit down and have some conversations, and
Hmm.
you know, now we have a wonderful relationship, but it took some time to get
One of the
there.
things that I've heard about like people leaving, these kinds of situations, because we've been researching this a little bit, was
Hmm.
like a lot of times what will happen for people, there'll be someone else, like what happened between you and your mom. All of a sudden, you're the person going, hey, what about this or what about that? And they can
Yeah.
feel the questioning, and they can also feel like there's a social bonding there, and then the attachment things don't feel so bad because I have other people to attach to. But it almost sounds like, were you doing this solo, or did you have other people that were kind of like, I don't know, like compatriots, for whatever better word with that? Maybe I said that wrong, but other people that, or did you run that more solo when you left? Were you just doing that more
Oh, I
independent?
was solo. I was solo.
Wow, that's
I didn't
pretty
have anyone.
rare, apparently, Leslie. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
was solo. I did not have any help. In fact, I remember I after I left, I made one friend. I made a friend. I met this woman. I made a friend, and I was like, "Oh my God, I have a friend," And
Well, you had like a
I
worldly friend, Leslie.
yes, she was a
A
worldly
worldly
friend, a
person.
worldly friend. And fun fact story is she was great. Actually, she was great. And the reason why she was so great is, after the kids wanted, I left, and I remember it was August, and October came, and my kids wanted to celebrate Halloween. And I was at Target, and they wanted to go down the Halloween aisle, and I was like, I literally couldn't breathe because 30 years of tapes are in my head, and I was like frozen. And I called my friend, my one friend, and she goes, "Which Target are you at?" And I told her, and she said, "I'm coming. I'll come." And she came to Target and walked down the aisles with the Halloween costumes for my kids and helped them pick out a outfit. And I was like, it was crazy, and they wanted to do all the stuff that we hadn't been doing, and so I wanted to give them that experience, and it was fine. But man, it was a lot to take. I was like shaking in my boots just at a stinking Target just to go down the aisle, the Halloween aisle.
Leslie, what was the first costume that you ever wore in your life for Halloween?
Well, I was 6 when I came in, so I did have a couple Halloweens prior to that.
But I
So
don't
I
but
was,
were you choosing what you wanted to be? I guess so, right? 5-year-old kid.
yeah, when I was little, yeah, I was Casper one year. Yeah,
But
I
what
was
about when you
Casper the
got
Friendly
out?
Ghost.
After 30 years of no Halloweens, what
I didn't do, that's one thing I never did is really dress up for Halloween. For some reason, that wasn't like the big thing to me. The big thing to me was like birthdays and like a birthday, to be able to celebrate a birthday was a big deal. And Christmas, I didn't know really how to do it.
Mm.
So my friend was like, "What do you mean you don't know how to do it?" I go, "I don't know how to do this. Like, do I get, like, I mean, I knew the gift thing and all that, but I'm like, I don't know how to do this." So she like helped me like navigate, how to rebuild like and learn things because I was very sheltered. Like I didn't know how to do all the worldly things.
Mm.
And my kids were like, and I remember my daughter was like, we were doing all the holidays and she goes, "It's Flag Day on Monday. Do we do anything for Flag Day?" I remember going, "Oh man, I created this monster." But yeah, so it was, yeah, so I remember it was just a rebuilding of that because I had so many years of tapes in my head of what was wrong. And, it was, but yeah, I did it myself. I was just like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And I was scared. I was scared shitless in a
Mm.
lot of levels. I was really scared. And,
Super bold.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
well,
very impressive. I mean, I've been paying attention with this, and most people, I mean, props give you the real like hands
well, thank
together and
you.
like, yeah, because like from what I've been hearing, I've been doing some research with this. Dan and I both have been doing it.
Hmm.
It's so hard for people to do that because, yeah, it takes a real boldness. Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky too. My dad was wonderful. My dad and I were very close, and I had him. And I had a lot of like resentment with my mother for the whole thing, but I think my dad, I really fell into him, so at least I had that support right there. And my extended family, really, I didn't was not close to them because my mom ostracized us growing up, not attending the family holidays and stuff like that and the parties. So I wasn't as close to my extended family, like cousins and aunts and uncles at all, because we were, ostracized from everything. And so yeah, I really just kind of fell into my dad, and and I hadn't worked in 10 years either. So guess what? I hadn't I hadn't worked in 10 years. I had to leave that, I had to figure it out. So in 1 month I got divorced, had to move, find a job. Like it was all just, and I'm not gonna lie, I think I drank for like 2 months every night. I did. I turned to alcohol for like 2 months, and then I was like, okay, like what are we doing here? Like you gotta stop. But yeah, I needed something to cope. I didn't know how to cope.
That's just impressive as hell, actually, to be
Mm.
honest. It's an impressive story. You know,
No, thank you.
most people
Thank
don't have
you.
this spiritual wherewithal to do that. So yeah, mad props. Mm.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it was a long time too to differentiate the difference between religion and spirituality. I didn't want anything to do. Um, I combine them in my head, and so I had a
Hmm.
hard time understanding that you can be spiritual. That's a different aspect than religion. So
Right.
I didn't want any part of anything forever. Like I just was like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want anything. And then as time went on and I unwound from everything, I started taking pieces of maybe different teachings or thoughts, and that resonated with me. And I think to Daniel, I described it once as threads. I took little threads from things and made it into my own spirituality that I could have. I cannot be part of anything organized to this day. I don't want to be part of anything organized, but doesn't mean that I can't find a spiritual path again for myself, which has just taken some time and some grace, and just being patient with myself on it, and realize
Hmm.
that, hey, you went through a lot. It's okay. But I'll hear certain, I'll listen to certain podcasts or certain thoughts, and I'll hear, I'm like, ooh, that's no, that's a good spiritual thought. I like that. I can incorporate that into something that resonates for me. And that's kind of what I've woven together for myself.
It's kind of interesting. I don't know if it makes like I'd love to hear a little bit about this, Daniel, because what's a little bit fascinating was it almost seems like the real breaking points were more like they weren't intellectual exactly, though they're part of
Hmm.
that, but it was more like, wow, man, I can't have my kids in this, and like do I really
Yeah.
believe this the same way? And this relationship isn't working. So I guess the other part that's kind of fascinating to me, if would be like, what of because there's this whole doctrine involved in these things,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
if you don't, I mean, if we have the time to do it, like, would you describe a
Sure.
little bit about like what the doctrine was, and
Oh
then like
man.
take you a while to like go because there's something about 1914
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's something about
Yeah.
144,000 people, and
Yeah.
there's heaven and earth, and the 144,000 are going to be in heaven, and the other people are going to be on earth, and there's some Armageddon
Yeah.
stuff. So
There's
that's
an
what I picked
Armageddon
up on.
stuff. Yes, that's a lot. Yeah, so 1914, they deemed the year that Christ went into power to, they were going to choose the 144,000 that were going to go to heaven permanently. So this group of people were chosen to be up in heaven, and the rest of us have an earthly hope, as they put. And we they believe that there's going to be an Armageddon where God destroys the unrighteous versus the righteous. However, they put it as if you're a witness, you'll be saved. Okay. And if you're a non witness, or if you know of the teachings of the organization and the truth, as they always called it, the truth. So if you know of the truth and you still didn't decide to practice it or stay in it or be in it, then, and you die on the outside of the organization, then you have forever destruction. So, and then after 1,000 year reign, there will be a resurrection of the people who died prior to Armageddon, and they have a chance to prove themselves as to whether or not they're going to live on this earth where it's become a paradise. So they always talked about it becoming a paradise where everything turns back into perfection, and you live on this paradise on earth. And the the scary thing is, I remember specifically being 8 years old and lying in bed at night, petrified, scared half to death that I wasn't going to make it, and fearful. And I remember praying to God that if He could just let me see what I look like as an adult. I'm 8 years old. I just wanted to see what I was going to be like as an adult. If I could just make it till I was 18. That was like something big for me. But I was scared half to death. And, I was scared of upsetting my mother or upsetting the apple cart, because then my life was at stake. That's how I viewed it. And listen, no 8 year old should lay in a bed worrying about whether or not, if they're good or bad, they're going to live or not. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I thought. And so that is what they teach. So you have the doomsday, that's going to be coming, and you have to be in compliance and, be a practicing witness to be able to survive this. And if you're not, then you're going to have forever destruction. And,
So you're laying in bed at 8 thinking, wow, man, I'm going to get forever destructed
uh-huh.
potentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
8 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, I was scared. And they had a lot of books and illustrations. So you had, it was called My Book of Bible Stories, and it was for kids. Well, heck, they have like fire coming down from the sky and people dying, and then the next page is this paradise. So it was scary. It was scary stuff that they were instilling in you, and it was this whole fear-based. Everything was fear-based. And so I was scared half to death to do anything wrong, so I, like I said, I conformed. And that was me personally. Some people don't take it that way. They're more like my brother was like, I'll see ya, I'm out, I'll take my chances. And I mean, props to him for doing that. I didn't have the guts at that point to do it. I had the guts later, but not at that point. So my brother did it much younger. But I just, it's definitely all fear based.
Well,
But he
so
was almost in a different place in psychological development when the stuff was kind of put on him too.
Hmm.
A lot younger, he
Yeah.
was almost like in the
Yeah.
adolescent phase where you're like,
Yeah.
oh, wait a minute. Yeah. That,
well, there's
yeah.
also there's a case for evolutionary psychology here too, Eric, where as you are threatened with being on the outside,
Hmm.
and from an anthropological, evolutionary psychological perspective, being on the outside meant you be on the outside of the tribe meant you were A, not likely to survive, and B,
Hmm.
definitely not likely to reproduce. So, in addition to the outside being scary, it is also a mechanism of survival. And if you have to rely on, like you were, Leslie, you have to rely on your parents for, sustenance, literally, that losing that would mean losing your ability to feed yourself, And at
Hmm.
first it's physical with food, but as you grow later on, it's emotional with love and everything else. So like this is part of the conditioning of not
Hmm.
only this what do you want to call it? Organization, religion, whatever, cult, but it's that way in society as a whole. If you want to buck the trend, then you might find yourself doing it alone. And so the question that, we've sort of been asking in all these like, cult episodes is like individuality, is the fallacy
Right.
because you find yourself in another layer of it. As soon as you step out, you're in another ring of
Hmm.
something else. It's a very
Hmm. Oh,
uh
sure. And it's very
enigmatic kind
easy.
of thing.
It's very easy to slide into all those. You have to be careful. I got into after I was divorced, I got into a relationship, a long-term relationship, and it ended up just being another controlling relationship. But I just a different face, on the
Mhm.
person because I hadn't that again, like I talked about in the very beginning with my mother, it was familiar. So to me, it was familiar. And so but then even though I knew it wasn't great, it was just familiar. And I had
Mhm.
to learn again, it was a long period of figuring out, oh wow, that is not how love looks. That is not how that's supposed to be. I had a very distorted sense of love, of how
Mm.
that, how that was. And it took me a while. You know, I I don't know. It just took a long time to get there. I mean, I
Mhm.
finally feel like I've crossed that and I've made that, but it took a long time. And relationships were very, very difficult after that, even worldly relationships, because I didn't know how to navigate those. I didn't know what real love and partnerships look like.
It's almost like a psychological and emotional part of like taking apart the things that you learned and sort of finding your truer self
Refining,
within
yeah,
that or something.
Mhm.
I was curious
yeah.
Mhm.
about the intellectual part of it because there's an emotional part to it, and also like with these ideas, like did
Hmm.
they dissolve over time? You're like, well, you know what? I don't believe in the 144,000 and the this and the that.
I think,
Like,
yeah,
is
I
that
think it just like they just dissolved over a period of time. Um, that's still that's still hard for me. I don't know what I can say I believe out of it and what I don't believe or what I resonate. I know there's things I don't believe out of it, and I know there's things that I'm like that could, I wouldn't say like everything they thought or everything they taught was wrong. It has always like a little thread of something in it, but I would say the majority of it, yeah, I would say I don't agree with the doctrine obviously anymore, but there's still like maybe some threads there that are, still left over that I still question in myself, like, hey, do I really feel like that still resonates with me or not? And it's a layering. That's all I can tell you, like one thing sheds away and maybe replace it with a new thought or a new idea. And it's just a peeling of layers. And that includes the doctrine, because that's been in you when, as a child, that's a long time to figure that out.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, there's this scholar of religion I kind of like, Bart Ehrman, and he was like became born again, like evangelical Christian in his like I guess his
Hmm.
teens or something. And it's interesting to hear him talk about it because for him it was I guess kind of intellectual. He,
Hmm.
eventually got to this point where it was like he tells this story of like writing a paper where he was trying to defend biblical infallibility and he wrote it for this like a biblical scholar class he was taking.
Hmm.
He was already in grad school maybe at that point, and then his professor read the whole thing, and in the end he just said like, well, maybe like Matt, whoever wrote Matthew just got this wrong, and that was the
Hmm.
comments of like the whole essay, and he just went crack, and everything started to crack. And he was
Cracking,
like,
yeah.
maybe they did just get it wrong,
Maybe they
I was
just
just,
got it wrong. Yeah.
maybe
And I
just
think
got
it's all
it wrong.
interpretation. Like there's so much
Yeah.
interpretation, different interpretation of the same. You can go to different religions and see the same scripture and they all have different interpretations of it. So it's like which one do you feel
Right.
is
Well, it's
right on that?
not even in its original language. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So you can't go
yeah.
ahead.
No, for him it was very like intellectual, but he didn't have
Hmm.
kids. He was a younger guy.
Yeah.
You like
Yeah,
look
I think
you
it's
started to say like, well,
different.
wait a minute, I can't have my kids in my life. What am I doing
Yeah,
with
I
this?
think it's
Yeah.
different for different people.
Yeah.
Like one of the ex-witnesses I speak to, it was definitely for him, it was more intellectual. Like he's like the facts just didn't line up to him. And I viewed it more of just it was more of an emotional issue with me. And now I think I look at religion or I hear an I've told this to Daniel. I have a hard time. I had a hard time walking into churches or anything like that. I would literally break out in hives for a
Wow.
long time.
Okay.
So if
Yeah.
I had to go to a wedding or a funeral, I knew I was gonna have red blotches on me. It just was a reaction. And just recently I had an experience with my son. My son has kind of like looked for his own faith and religion in his own way. And, I guess I wanted it stirred a lot with me, and I knew it was me, not necessarily him. And I just am like, hey, listen, like I'm all about supporting you, whatever he's in the middle of searching right now. And so I just went to see him at college and he asked me to go to church with him. And I was like, whoo, whoo, whoa, that's a big one.
And he's
But
gonna have the
I
histamines and
yeah, I
yeah,
need
some
something. But
Xanax. Yeah.
I told him, I said, I'll go with you because basically I want to see what my son's listening to and what he was interested in. But I gave myself the out. I said, if it gets too much for me, I'm going to go to the car. And he said, yeah, no problem. But I sat there and I listened and I was okay. I didn't break out in hives. Nothing happened. But all I could see up there was, to me, it was just a salesman. That's how I viewed it. It's just a salesman. I just see it up there and I saw it and I'm like, man, this is just, they're just selling. And that's how I view it, now. I just can't see it any other way. And,
But you have the choice of whether you want to buy it or not.
yeah. And that's what, and it was interesting. I told Daniel, I was like, I had a moment where it was all coming up and I was feeling very, um, overwhelmed for a second. And I actually talked to myself as like being an adult to a little kid and said, hey, you're safe. You're safe. And you have a choice here. You have freedom and you have a choice. So you can walk out, or you can stay here and see what's going on. And, and after I did that for myself and kind of went into the parent, child mode and did that, I was like, all right, I'm okay. And then I was fine for the rest of the time. I didn't have that overwhelming feeling. Once I told myself, hey, you're safe, Les, like it's okay, you're safe. But yeah, my kids are kind of finding their own path in their own way. And, I let them kind of with guidance, maybe, I try to still continue to guide them, but they also have to have their own freedoms and beliefs. And, I might not resonate with them. And I told my son, I go, hey, this is not for me. And he said, I know. And we had a long talk about it afterwards. So, it's okay.
And maybe the thing in the end, though, like what you were saying, though, if you're sitting there going, what is this person selling? That might be a good question that everyone should ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
What
know
are
what I
you
mean?
selling?
What are you selling? Like a lot of times in life, we should be asking that question. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
wisdom in that. That's
Yeah.
learned from
Yeah.
experience of like, if more people maybe would ask, like, wait a minute, what the fuck are they trying to sell here? Maybe you get
Yeah.
That's
more
the
of the less
question.
less chicanery going on in
Well,
Yeah.
the
they get
world,
based
right?
up in everybody gets built up in the emotion of it, right? So that's the biggest thing is they take the emotion of where you are and they build on that and they build on that. And that's where I see a lot of it happen. It's based on emotion. But I have no problem. Like I'm cool with anyone. They can, hey, you do you. Like, I don't think that way at all. That took a long time too, for me to not see things black and white and me to see the gray and realize that, hey, people just are people. They're just trying to make their way through life and, find out what's right for them. And hey, you wanna, be my guest. That's really how I am. Do you. I might not agree with them and they might not agree with me, but I'm cool with that. I'm just like, hey, agree to disagree and still have a good conversation, and it's
That's
fine.
another thing that's very hard for people now, Leslie.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
but I think
hard to
it's
go like,
important.
hey, like we may not see it, but it's okay that we don't have to
Yeah,
like
but
fight
that's
to the
okay.
death
You know,
over
like I
this.
think it's important. It's important to do that. I think it's important to be able to see somebody's their own viewpoint and point of view, and their own experiences are shaping why they have that point of view, just like mine are. And I that's how I view it. I just view it like, everybody is going to do their own thing, and what is this? We're all just here in life trying to get by and get through the human experience and enjoy it. Maybe enjoy it as we go, and but people have that freedom to do. If I want freedom, who am I to not give it to somebody else and not
Yeah,
allow
that's
somebody?
that's
That's
wise
that
too.
that is
Yeah,
and that yeah, and I think that's a good place to call it right there. I think
yeah.
that's a high note. So Leslie, I want to give you the opportunity for, the 5% of people who are still listening to the very end. Um, because that number is small. You know what I'm saying? Attention spans are short.
Yeah,
Thank you, TikTok, and thank
yeah,
you, advertisers, over the last, I don't know, 40 years or so, doing
yeah.
commercials and whatnot. But if there's something that you would like to leave with people who are maybe find themselves questioning the
Hmm.
the confines of the conditioning that they have been given, whether it be directly in a cult or a religion, or even from society, political ideology, whatever, scholastic, it doesn't matter, familial, cultural. There's many different boxes that we find ourselves in, but you having made the conscious choice as an adult, yes, motivated by a poor relationship and not wanting to repeat the same mistakes that were done to you to your children, you still made a conscious choice. One
Hmm.
that you said, I'm going to change the trajectory of my life. And in order to do that, I am willing to give everything up in order to do that, right?
Hmm.
That is the responsibility. Sometimes that is the responsibility of freedom. That is individuality in its essence. And to say, I am going to
Hmm.
do this as an individual, right? And I'm taking the responsibilities and the consequences and the rewards of all of
Hmm.
these choices. So, um, as somebody who has done that, and I don't think a lot of people have in this lifetime, really, which is a unique, you don't get any badges that you get to wear on your, lapel.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a unique place to be in. What would you say to somebody who's listening to this who might find themselves in a similar position in their own way?
Pick your pain. Either way, it's going to be painful. You
Mm,
have to make the choice to stay in it and deal with that pain, or have the temporary fire destruction that you're going to blow it up and deal with that pain, but then come on the other side being with it, with your new life and your new self and freedom. And I would say pick your pain, because either way you're going to go through it.
mm.
Either way. Yeah,
That is
that
not
would
where I
be it.
thought you were going to go, but I like that. That
Is
was
that
good.
not?
You might be
But
a
I that's
follower of like Shakti or Kali if you ever go to India.
no,
Yeah.
She's like,
I'm
we're
sorry that
burning
that's
this
the
shit to
way,
the
but
ground.
Yeah, fuck
That's
this.
that's
it.
that's no,
That's those
that's the way I
kick-ass
live. Pick
Indian
your
goddesses. Oh, sorry, what?
But pick your pain, dude. That's how I view it. Like either
Well,
way, you're gonna go through it. So I mean, I guess if you want me to say, hey, there'll be, there's, I could do the flowery
No,
approach and
you do
say, hey,
you. You do you. You're
but that
free. You're a free
that was,
being.
yeah, that's what I would tell
No, I
people.
love
Like you
it.
got to pick
That's
it.
I
Like
think
that's
for
great.
choose one way or the other. I'm
for
very
you,
bottom line. You know that about me, Daniel. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
man, you got to choose it either way. Like you're
I
gonna go
think
through
your
it this way or
oh sorry. I think
no.
your
Go ahead.
first Halloween costume, Leslie, might be the goddess Kali. You're just like, yeah, I'm burning this shit to the ground. We're
I'm burning
starting
this
over.
shit to the ground. We're starting over. Probably. I mean, that's how I viewed it. I was like, well, I'm just gonna light it on fire and walk away. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
other way. So yeah, I guess I mean, I would say if somebody is going to leave or they want to leave, definitely get into a therapist that maybe would be specialized in religious trauma would be a big one,
Mm,
because that would be definitely a help. And that was I definitely needed to go through therapy and different aspects of managing mental health, because it was quite a mess. After I left, I was quite a mess.
I
But
would imagine so.
Yeah, I would definitely say, find somebody who specializes in that field, and that would be a good starting point. If
Yeah,
that's where you're gonna go with that, is go to a therapist who specializes in religious trauma
that is a
and
very,
help you
very,
out.
very good advice.
Yeah.
Um, well, Leslie, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank
That was
you.
that
Thank
was
you. I
really,
appreciate
really
it.
great,
Yeah,
really
seriously, that
great.
was incredibly like articulate
Oh,
presentation of something.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Of
Uh-huh.
well, I had a
Yeah.
great time. Thank you guys. This is good for my healing too. And that's how
course.
I view it. This is all good to talk about. And if you can help one person to, make a decision to help them have freedom and live their life the way that they want to choose to lead it, then hey man, that's
Yeah.
that's the way to do it and go.
Yeah. So thanks,
So,
thanks again for coming on. This was really
thank you.
great. Yeah, I really appreciate it. A lot of wisdom
No
there.
problem.
Um, Eric, as always, thank you for co-piloting the ship with me. Audience, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have a question or comment, or that's about it, you can leave it in the YouTube section, or I guess on Spotify has a place for questions, comments, whatever. If for some reason you have something specific for Leslie, or you have somebody who might be looking to kind of get their way out, and you think that she might be a good resource or whatnot, email us at ginandtantra@gmail.com. That's ginandtantra@gmail.com. Or hit us up on the gram, the Gin and Tantra podcast. We'll put you in contact with her if it feels like the right fit. Or if you have something else for us, no dick pics. We've had
Oh man. No, thank you.
right. But yeah, so that's about it. So, if you like what we're doing, share our work, like, subscribe, do all that kind of shit. It helps us out in the algorithm, and it gets our message out to a larger audience. And we appreciate everybody for tuning in. For Leslie and Eric, this is Daniel. Leslie, thanks for coming on. Audience, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.